The countdown to counting votes. Michigan finally has its say in the primary this Tuesday. The state Democratic and Republican Party chairs are here to talk about it. And after a whirlwind week of candidate consolidation, what will Michigan's results say about the nationwide race? Today is Sunday, March 8, 2020, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. We come to you after another deluge of news this past week, from the continuing fight against coronavirus to the continuing crackdown on corruption at the UAW. This week it landed on the biggest target yet, former UAW President Gary Jones, charged with embezzling union money. That news broke the same day that we learned that Art Van Furniture, an iconic Michigan business, had collapsed into liquidation. It was a stunner, especially for 3,100 workers losing their jobs. And it really does feel like the end of an era. And that happened as we arrive at a big Michigan moment, the primary election in a state that could prove so critical in the race to the White House. A week ago, we figured we'd have a packed ballot here, but after a jaw-dropping week, all of a sudden the race is mano a mano. The women, the minorities, the more youthful candidates all voted off the island, and two older white men survive. What will the Michigan vote mean 2 days hence? It's today on Flashpoint. All right, we're going to start this morning with a duo I was hoping we could get together. Not easy to coordinate their schedules. It's interesting, they're both working toward the same thing, but in very different ways. Happy to say that both accepted our invitation. We've got the two party chairs for the state of Michigan with us this morning. For the Republican Party, Laura Cox is here, and the chair of the Michigan Democrats, Lavora Barnes. Thank you both very much for coming. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
Let me start, Lavora, with the week that we've just seen. I can't quite remember ever seeing a more volatile, consequential, condensed week in a primary.
I've never seen anything like it. I've been doing this work for quite a long time, and the speed with which things have changed in this primary, it's mind-blowing.
What does it mean? What is it telling us?
I think it means it's time. It was time for this field to narrow. You know, we've been running for a while, doing debates after debates after debates with a large field of candidates. We always knew it was going to narrow, and it's time.
Laura, what does it seem to look like from your point of view that it does, we did have this I suppose it looked really good to be a Republican to have these candidates tearing at each other the way that they were, and now it's starting to distill.
Yeah, it's not over till it's over. We're excited to let them battle it out, and we're just keeping our head to the ground and keep fighting to make sure that we reelect our president. Well,
let's start then with where you both think that the state of Michigan is right now. Clearly, it's going to be consequential. We know that. The most recent polls have the president trailing, whether it's Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden in Michigan.
You know, the real poll is the election day in November, and we're really excited. The president is trending the way he needs to be. He's leading. Michigan is feeling his strong leadership. The economy's humming. Tax reform is affecting families across Michigan. 100,000 new jobs in Michigan. 20,000 of those are in the manufacturing sector since the president took office. We're excited. We keep talking about his track record of successes, and we know that people are going to support the president.
I'm assuming you don't see it that way, Laura. Just my guess.
Right, just a small guess. It's funny, we have something in common, though, because we have been talking about the track record of the president as well. But we talk about it in terms of the broken promises, the things that he stood in Michigan and said were going to happen that haven't happened, the way we've decimated health care, the way we're coming after manufacturing jobs, the way we've made it impossible for people to work and live on one job, an economy that lifts the folks up at the top, but not the folks down below.
We've talked about this quite a bit on the program. It is interesting, though, the way that the president has taken an issue that Democrats have treated as their own for a long time, and that was trade. Democrats for a long time felt that China was being very unfair in the open market, and it was Democrats who largely complained about NAFTA being unfair. The president has taken both of those tasks up. Isn't that, do you applaud that?
A lot of the credit for this goes to the House members in the U.S. Congress who actually...
Not the trade war.
Well, no, not the trade war, but the success that we've had in making the changes. And here's the thing. In Michigan, we know that an important part of making our economy work is having a trade system that works for us. And so our candidates all are talking about that, and we'll continue talking about it.
This is an interesting, tricky time, I suppose, to be who you are. The last time around, the state of Michigan went for Bernie Sanders. Shocked everybody that he beat Hillary Clinton here. Right now, we just saw the governor, who was going to sit on the sidelines, came out, endorsed Joe Biden. What do you expect is going to happen on Tuesday? And as the state's party chair, what do you want to see happen?
I want to see millions of folks come out to vote. I want to see Democrats all show up and choose their choice to run against Donald Trump. And then I want to see us all come together at the end to defeat Donald Trump in November.
That's diplomatic.
Well, that's what I want. So it helps that that's true.
Laura, the president seems to want to run against Bernie Sanders. I think there's a lot of Republicans who feel like that's a much easier race. Is that how you sense it?
No, I think the president's prepared whoever the candidate is. Right now he's focused on leading, delivering. And like you said, he fought for the American worker. He made a promise. He kept it. USMCA was the president fought for that, the trade deals with China. What president in history has done that? President Trump did that. He took China's feet to the fire. He's pushing to make sure he's saying America first, and that's been his policy the entire time, and we're seeing the benefits here in Michigan.
He's also, though, been very strident in his opinions that there's not much we can do about climate change. Climate change is one of the top issues right now. We're losing square miles of Michigan because of the rising water around us right now. PFAS is a massive problem in the state here. I'm wondering if you think that ends up costing the president in Michigan.
No, absolutely not. I think his track record of protecting the environment, putting forth policies to.
He also, by the way, kept trying to take money out of the Great Lakes restoration that our congressional representatives.
But he fully funded that. He fully funded that.
Eventually.
Absolutely, and that's a good thing. The Congress fought for it, and he funded it fully, and we're seeing the benefits here in Michigan from his leadership.
Environment seemed like an opening for you, then?
Absolutely. When you have a climate change denier in the White House, when you have a party full of climate change deniers running candidates up and down the ticket, it's something we will continue to talk about because it's so important to us here in Michigan. You mentioned PFAS. This issue is a big issue for folks. People in their homes are not feeling safe, not feeling like they can open the tap and get water that they can consume. We need elected officials to understand that and want to do something about it.
Something I'd like you both to address. It seems to me that we've kind of reached a pretty sad point in American politics where there doesn't seem to be a candidate who wants to run to be the president for everybody. The Democrats have largely given up on a lot of the president's supporters, and it feels like the president's the president has given up on those who support Bernie Sanders and those who support, maybe to a less degree, but to Joe Biden. I'm not sure there's anybody that's saying, I want to be the president for everyone.
I think all the Democrats are saying they want to be the president for everyone. I think what you're hearing
you think they believe that the president's most ardent supporters are reachable, winnable?
I believe they recognize that when they are president, it is their job to be the president for everyone. This isn't about who's going to turn out to vote for them. They understand that some of those supporters of the president will never come to the Democratic side, and we understand that. But when they win and when they are president of the United States, they will be president for everyone.
I disagree. I know that the president absolutely is the president for everyone. America First policies, like I said, he's fighting for workers. He's fighting for American families, tax reform, fighting for the opioid crisis. He took that bull by the horn and is trying to keep families together. Criminal justice reform is helping families across the country, giving people a clean slate to go back into the workforce and be a part of society. The president is the president for everybody, and we as Republicans are encouraging anybody, Democrat, Independent, Republican, support the president. If your life is better than it was 4 years ago, you absolutely need to re-elect him.
But there's very little purple on the map. I mean, Michigan is a state that tends to be maybe more purple than most. But you don't see that what I'm getting at, that we have become so rusted into our places.
Well, I think that people want to perceive that from talking points from the newspaper or the media, but bottom line is his policies touch everybody across the country and everybody here in Michigan in positive ways, and that's what we're continuing to talk about.
So not so much perception as reality. If you think about how this president has been sort of an equal opportunity hater, he's been unkind and evil to people of all walks of life. So absolutely not a president for everyone. We need to move forward in a way that brings people into the country. It makes them comfortable here. It makes it easy for folks to do the jobs they need to do.
I want to quickly move down the ticket a little bit. You believe, I'm sure, that John James is a better chance than he did against Debbie Stabenow the last time around, or do you see it as being a similar race?
No, I see he's an electrifying candidate. People are so excited about him. He's a combat veteran. He is a family man. He is a job provider. He signs both sides of the check. He understands what it's like to lead. People are excited, and people in Michigan feel like they need a voice in the U.S. Senate, and John James is the man for that.
You know, Senator Peters has been that voice, and he will continue to be that voice when he wins in November. He's running a good race. He's doing good work as a U.S. Senator. I would say we would encourage John James to get out more and get more visible so folks can get to know and compare these two candidates. And when they do, they'll see that Senator Peters comes out on top.
The last thing I wanted to make sure you got a chance to weigh in on, we have seen some disastrous problems with voting thus far.
Yes.
Not just what happened in Iowa. I guess we're done with California, but it was a mess.
Yes.
What is going on, and why isn't it easier to vote in America?
Well, we do need to make it easier to vote in America right now, and I think we've got policies coming from the top that make it harder and harder for folks to vote. What happened in Iowa happened because they tried to actually be more open about their process and give more results, and it turns out that that was harder to do than it was. Lucky for us, the professionals will run our campaign, our race, and our elections will be.
Well, but the absentee ballot,
yes.
no reason absentee ballot is going to change the way it's been here as well.
It is, and the results are going to take some time to come in. People need to be patient. It's going to take some time to count on these.
Your thoughts on the same matter?
Yeah, I think we're really excited that there is no reason, AV. We want to encourage everybody to get out and vote, Republican, Democrat, Independent. Look at the track record from the president, and you decide if your life's better, you definitely want to re-elect him, and we feel good about that.
We'll bring in the roundtable to set things up for this Tuesday's Michigan primary in just a second. Thank you both so much for being here. I hope we can do it again as we head toward November. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
You're looking at United Shore, one of the fastest growing companies in Metro Detroit. From the moment you step foot on its campus, you understand why United Shore is a one-of-a-kind workplace. And that goes well beyond the 1.5 million square foot state-of-the-art campus and its many convenient perks. Home to the #1 wholesale mortgage lender in the nation, UWM, United Shore is a company where people can build a career. Just ask the more than 2,000 team members promoted over the last 2 years. You heard that right. They don't have employees. They have team members, nearly 5,000 to be exact. Everyone engages you and welcomes you into a culture that's more like family, built on thoughtfulness and friendship. The office layout is open, just like the doors of the company's leaders. Fundraisers and volunteering are commonplace. Meetings aren't allowed on Thursdays. And there's a long-standing commitment to a firm 40. That's a 40-hour work week and the promise of having time to have a life. Sound like a place that could work for you? Go to UnitedShore.com to learn more.
For me, it's been a lot of fun. I'm proud of the second generation, the third generation.
We treat our customers the way our grandfather treated our family. The same rules apply today in business as they did when you started. You take care of the employees, you take care of the customers, and the rest will come.
I've been with the Tamroff Automotive family since 1993.
Been here since 1988.
We're going on 36 years.
It's a good place to work. I think it all starts from the top.
Monday at 5, a drive-by shooting driven by revenge.
We heard a lot of gunfire went off.
Why would they target their rival's grandmother's house?
It was like they was just emptying a clip.
According to court documents, the brothers wanted to kill because someone embarrassed them on social media.
Now, as these criminals are headed to prison, the defenders take you into a relieved neighborhood and inside the investigation.
You're going to reap what you sow when you're out here doing wrong.
Monday on Local 4 News at 5.
All right, let's bring in this morning's Knights of the Round Table. Very good to have with us political consultant Mario Moro back again. Political strategist Jill Alper is with us. Detroit Free Press columnist Nancy Kaffer and State Representative Abdullah Hammoud. Thank you all very much for coming. You all come from very different perspectives on what you've seen thus far. But Jill, you've been around a lot of campaigns. I want to start with you just over what we watched happen over the span of 5 or 6 days last week. I've never seen anything more extraordinary in primary politics than watching the chairs shuffle.
Yeah, it was sort of like the Wild Wild West, right? Pew, 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 where are the bodies, and all of that. But yeah, you saw major forces and different parts of the parties sort of mouthpieces, standard bearers, issue advocates, one by one, choose to exit the race. There were results, there were conversations, and there was movement. And never so much, I think, by so many who had been around for so long, that were so resourced, choosing to act as they did in surprising ways that weren't even, I think, anticipated by those following the race all the time.
Yeah. It was a stunt. Mario, one thing also that it led me to believe is that Iowa and New Hampshire are as antiquated an idea as ever, because the people a lot of the folks who did really well there were gone in the blink of an eye. It really is time to do this.
And we got to give Vice President Joe Biden some credit for that, because he basically said, "Hey, I don't think I'm going to do too well in these two caucuses. However, when we get to South Carolina, I'm going to show you what a real leader looks like, or actually gets votes, and especially from African Americans, because they're going to put me on." He made a prediction at the debate. I'm going to win South Carolina, and the African American vote is going to put me over.
You are not going anywhere as a Democratic candidate if you don't have support in the African American community, which brings me to Abdullah Bernie Sanders, who you were, I believe, the earliest at the Capitol to support Bernie Sanders.
Correct.
This problem, though, that he seems to have, in fact, he's kind of now passing on a number of southern states, going to focus here in Michigan. Terribly important for him next week to win the state that he won in the primary before. But if you can't reach into the African American community, it's really tough to win as a Democrat, isn't it?
It is. I think for Bernie Sanders, you've seen that he really is the campaign with the largest organizing effort across the country. He is winning amongst a very diverse coalition, the young people across all races and demographics. He's winning the second largest voting bloc in the country, which is the Hispanic vote as well. And here in Michigan, you'll see that he's also winning amongst the Muslim vote and the American vote, which I think will provide him a decisive victory, hopefully, come the Michigan primary on Tuesday.
Nancy, your column this past week, I think, registered with a lot of women who have watched yet another very strong woman candidate not make it to the final cut. You wrote kind of was almost a very wistful, nearly a love letter to watching Elizabeth Warren's campaign dissipate.
You know, I read a lot about policy. She is a policy queen. Like, it was really wonderful to have this candidate a woman candidate who could tackle such substantive issues with really great comprehensive programs, actual plans to get us to these progressive solutions. And yeah, it was heartbreaking to see her not do well.
And I think the best debater, probably. And I keep saying, I think in some ways the fiercest thinker of the pool, and yet it wasn't enough.
She's kind of too good for us, right?
I don't know that, well, clearly voters didn't think so. But as I said off the top of the program, Jill, we had this really diverse pile of candidates to start. We had an Asian American. In fact, we had two really young candidates in. We had women. We had African Americans, and in the end, we end up with two old white guys.
Right, and GLBTQ. So many dynamics at work, you know, gender bias, which is even unconscious gender bias for some voters. They don't even know how these things impact them. But what I will say is that I think it's a win for the Democratic Party. There is some, you know, always fatigue while these conversations are going on, but new people are becoming engaged as a result, and the conversation has been about Donald Trump still, even though there were disagreements, sometimes big, but generally the values were the same and the platforms were the same. Some of the plans may have been more specific, but I will say that for all of the pew 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 in the last week, that there'll be some peace here, and we've got just a couple weeks maybe before we have
I don't know.
A presumptive nominee.
The Bernie Sanders crowd that I remember covering in Philadelphia at the DNC in 2016 was unlike any political group I've ever been around before. Mario, they're not being talked into supporting anyone else.
No.
They're not going along to play nice.
Right.
And many of them have never been involved in politics before. It took Bernie to get them. So how do you make peace out of that, I guess?
Well, first of all, it all depends on what happens in Michigan and Wisconsin.
Well, let's get to that. What happens in Wisconsin? What happens in Michigan on Tuesday?
This is so tight right now, but the momentum is with Joe Biden. The momentum is with Joe Biden, and if he gets his support base, primarily the African Americans, to come out to vote in his favor, then I think that it's going to go in his favor. I'm giving him the edge right now, but Michigan politics, anything can happen. We've seen Jesse Jackson, George Wallace. We've seen Bernie Sanders be Hillary Clinton. Anything can happen.
Absolutely.
But one more point that I want to piggyback on something you had mentioned about the right now we have two white guys on the top of the ticket. Let's say three. Let's count Trump because he's going to get the nod on the Republican side. This is going to be so
you can
important.
Still count Tulsi Gabbard, I guess, but go ahead.
This is going to be so important for the vice presidential pick. And I'm thinking that, first of all, it's going to have to be a woman on the Democratic side. It's going to have to be a woman. And to some degree, maybe African American
Maybe,
woman.
maybe.
I want to point out that we're all clear that Bernie Sanders won the primary in Michigan in 2016, but he lost the vote in the city of Detroit by 42 points. So, you know, Joe Biden has support in the African American community.
Yep.
You know, what's going to happen in Michigan this time? You know, has Bernie expanded his base among African Americans in Michigan? If you can't turn out Detroit, if you can't turn out other places where there are big enclaves of black voters, it's not going to happen. This election's not going to be decided by people who look like the three of us.
Well, interesting, Abdullah. In fact, so many people have made Bernie Sanders' primary win 4 years ago about Hillary, that it was a sign of trouble, that she wasn't really reaching out to Michigan. But maybe, I think the way you see it, it was really more about Bernie and the way that he connected with a lot of Michigan.
I think it was about expanding the electorate. I think it was about organizing on the ground. I mean, he's hosting several rallies over the next several days. You see his campaign offices all across the state. There is nobody that has knocked more doors or dialed more on the phones than Bernie Sanders' campaign collectively. I think he has a platform that speaks to this idea of dismantling this system that really hasn't worked for the average working family.
Labeled as a socialist platform.
Well, I was going to say, one of the reasons why all of this happened in those last 5 days is there clearly was a lot of fear about Bernie Sanders being the standard bearer for the party. Why aren't you more afraid about an avowed socialist who really refuses to condemn Fidel Castro as much as everybody would like him to? I mean, he clearly doesn't seem as risky in the general election to you, but he clearly does to many Democrats.
I mean, he's not risky. I mean, let's look at his democratic socialist platform, Medicare for all. I don't know why it's such a radical idea to believe that we should spend $12,000 out of our pocket before a health insurance company spends a dime. I don't know why it's so radical of an idea that myself sitting here before you, I have $350,000 of student loan debt. Why is it radical to think that there should be an ability to find a pathway to tuition-free college for all? Why is it radical to vote against endless wars? These are things that Bernie has a consistency, he has the authenticity, and he has the voting record to support, unlike the others currently in the race.
I think what's radical is the idea that we can get there in 4 years with a Congress that is going to look a lot like the Congress we have now. And I would kind of posit that if we really had a huge appetite for democratic socialists, that we probably would have elected more of them to things.
Jill, am I using the right word? Is it fear from a lot of Democrats of what Bernie would be in the general election then?
Well, I think it's a practical concern. I think Nancy touched on something, which is what is the public's appetite for this kind of, it would be radical change. I don't mean radical as ideas, because we all agree on the principle that everybody should be insured. How do you get there? And can you get it done? And I think that's a lot of what we saw come out of South Carolina into Super Tuesday, where large states all over the country taking a look and saying the number one thing in all polls pretty much is beating Donald Trump. And I think Democrats on the ticket were afraid to be running underneath, or are concerned about running underneath those kinds of ideas.
But if we look at the polling pertaining to the issues and the policies that Bernie's advocating for, they overwhelmingly win across the board, across the country. And we need somebody who's not only going to beat Trump, but who will enter office and be able to push forth an agenda. Now, you may think that we want a candidate who's moderate, more centrist, but we're not going to get the types of changes that we need that are going to help the everyday working families. Bernie Sanders can go in on day one, can help push an agenda. But secondly, on a foreign policy level, here is an individual who can assume the presidency and from day one really reshape our foreign policy, unlike other candidates, because he has that authority as president.
But as a member of the legislature, you know that one person without like-minded people voting around them, an idea really doesn't count much for an idea if it doesn't have a chance of succeeding and turning into action.
Unless you're able to organize and mobilize and build coalitions. And I think Bernie has shown time and time again his ability to build coalitions. He has passed more amendments on the U.S. Senate
I think a lot of people like the fact that he's more of an island.
But he's passed more amendments on the U.S. Senate floor than any other senator. I mean, I think we see his ability to actually get things done.
Well, what I would be really thoughtful about if I were a Sanders supporter or Sanders himself is that thus far, the people most impacted, disproportionately impacted by the status quo, unfavorably impacted, are people of color. And let's see what happens Tuesday, because so far they're not really en masse.
We have not probably, I only got about 30 seconds left, Mario, but a lot of people are worried that Joe Biden, though, is just a few gaffes away from blowing up at any moment, that he's just sort of scatterbrained too often.
A lot of people are looking at who can beat Donald Trump. And the win goes more in favor of Joe Biden than someone who's labeled as a socialist, that people really don't even understand what socialism is all about. I think that it's going to come down to whoever proves their way with the voters as it relates to their philosophy.
I'll just push back on that because we said the same argument with Hillary Clinton, and we saw what happened in 2016.
I got to get to a break. Thanks, gang, very much for the conversation. We'll wrap things up right after this. This is Flashpoint on Local 4. Yeah.
Every Jeep Compass is built to stand the test of lunch breaks and ocean breaks. The test of bringing down the house and finding the best seats in the house. Because every Jeep Compass is built to stand the test of time. And now it's time to celebrate the longest lasting 4x4 SUV brand on the road.
During the Jeep Celebration event, well-qualified returning employee lessees can lease the 2020 Compass for $199 a month.
Is your loved one living with a developmental disability, autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy? Are you in need of resources to assist with their ability to be independent, work, and live in the community? DWIHN is here to help. Give the Detroit Wayne Integrated Health Network a call today. 24/7, 800-241-4949, where ability matters. Here to talk, here to help.
Ready to purchase your first home? Not only will Hall Financial get you pre-approved same day, we're going to connect you with a top realtor in your area. Call 248-308-5000 or chat with us at davidhallmortgage.com.
With Michigan weather being so unpredictable, spend tax returns and profit-sharing checks where it matters most, your home. Call Ace & Sons today.
As the coronavirus crisis continues to grow, Local 4 is committed to making sure you have the very latest information.
I am committed to telling you what we know and the source of the information.
Don't miss our daily updates on Local 4 News and click on Detroit.
Hey, if you watch Local 4 over the air with an antenna, you need to listen up. Thursday after midnight, you need to rescan your TV, or you might see this in the morning. He's right. Want more information? Go to Click on Detroit and search Rescan.
Of course, many people have already voted absentee. If you haven't, make sure you get out and vote on Tuesday and then watch your vote count with us as we'll follow the results here on Local 4. That's going to do it for us. Meet the Press coming up next. We'll see you next time right back here for Flashpoint.